before we get started, like with stuff like rules of engagement, things like that, usually those are classified to the highest level because what you end up having happen is people will exploit them.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, so Vietnam, the famous cases of the North Vietnamese ground defenses, they very quickly realized that you could not strike a target within 700 meters of a dike. So guess where they put all the anti-aircraft guns? So that's, things like that, that got known. What was the other, during Linebacker 2, they had moved some of the heavier anti-aircraft artillery onto, and some of the radars, or the fire support, or radars, onto the top of a hospital.
Yeah.
Because once you launch Mr. Shrike or Mr. Standard, they go to the radar wherever it is. And so
And
here,
they light it up.
here comes a Standard missile, which is basically a big anti-radiation missile. It's like, I mean, huge. And it came right to the roof of that hospital. Next thing you know, you're the Americans putting a missile through the hospital.
Classic,
And
classic
that's,
case
Yeah, that's
was
constant.
Haiphong Harbor.
Jack
Matter of-
Broughton.
Huh?
You gonna talk about Jack Broughton?
Yeah. There was an incident, they painted a red cross on top of a warehouse next to the rail yard in Haiphong Harbor. Jack Bratton was in an A4, got a strike, or Sam fired at him. It blew the bombs off. They hit the hospital, and the secondaries were over 20,000 feet high. That was their primary weapons storage in Haiphong. He almost got court-martialed by McNamara because of it, because they said he dropped the bombs there on purpose.
I understand with that, like, and we'll get a little bit to the rules of land warfare, the Geneva, basically the Geneva Convention during it. The flip side of that is, if you are a combatant and you exploit the rules in such a way, it is considered a war crime.
Yeah.
As in, not a, oh, we're gonna slap you on the wrist or anything else, but a no kidding, we're gonna put a noose around your neck and we're gonna kick you off the chair type war crime. And your opposition may also elicit retaliation.
So irregulars, under the Geneva Convention, you can literally just execute them.
Yeah, out of
on
hand.
capture. So like everyone's like, oh, well, we have to treat Taliban and whoever.
Yeah.
No, if you're fighting and you're not in uniform, you can be executed immediately.
Do they usually do that now, though?
No.
And we'll get into some of that also with
So
information warfare.
there's lawfare, or lawfare.
Yeah, lawfare.
Lawfare.
Is a
I think
whole
that's-
whole thing. Yeah, I've been to a conference, a lawfare conference out in DC, and it was talk bizarro land. It's crazy what some of these people are talking about.
All right.
Who's moderating this?
I guess I'll moderate.
Crazy show.
Sorry, for the uninitiated, what's lawfare?
It is warfare through law. Basically, what the JAG, the Judge Advocate General Office of each branch, they all get together and they discuss what we can do legally, what we can do morally, and then what we'll get in trouble for doing, even if it is moral and legal.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And the whole concept of lawfare in the other sense is
It gets
there's
used
that
against
thought
us.
process that because I know you have to play by the rules, I can basically try to shape the rules in order to reduce some of your advantages. So if I say I have a certain frequency for sonars, I can try to say things like, well, that will harm whales, so let's have an environmental rule that says you can't use you can't use those frequency as sonars. And now this happens to be exactly the frequency of sonars you need to hunt diesel submarines, which we don't have any, but other nations
Don't get
do.
me started.
And the reason this becomes such an issue is we have the UN Security Council that has us, the UK, some other people we don't care about, and the Chinese and Russians.
Yeah.
So, so we have basically some of the bad actors, the known bad actors who do really shady, horrible stuff and break the law all the time, on the council making the veto power of, no, that's not going to be a law. No, that's not going to be a law. Hey, we'll bribe these other 50 countries to vote for this law that we know is going to screw you over, and we'll pay them lots of money to do it. So.
All right, so I'm gonna go ahead and light this candle. My name is Dr. James Young. I'm a doctor in history, as well as in a day job. I work for the United States Army. This panel is gonna be rules of engagement And we're going to go ahead and I'm going to try to guide it to doing things that'll be useful for you guys as far as when you're writing your military sci-fi or any other genre. So I'll go ahead and start with Jim, and everybody can introduce themselves and their background.
Jim Curtis, I've got two current series running. One's military science fiction, the other one is current law enforcement, cops and robbers against the cartel down on the border. I'm a retired naval flight officer, retired government serpent, not civil serpent like him, but defense contractor, engineer. I was an aviator, so the rules that I had to play by are entirely different than what these guys do.
I'm Kal Spriggs. I write predominantly military science fiction, also some military fantasy, some YA science fiction, urban fantasy, sci-fi, urban fantasy, and then some near future sci-fi stuff as well.
My name's Dee. Spent 20 years in the Air Force, so got a unique perspective. I did some training in Korea with site defense, which kind of rolls under the rules of engagement. I was the Utah Poet of the Year for 2016 for my collection about military and mental illness. So
I guess the first question I'll ask is, how do you guys feel rules of engagement have evolved? We've talked a little bit about that below. How do you feel they've evolved over the next 20 years, or last 20 years, and how do you see that going for the next 20 years?
I'll start it.
Okay.
They're getting more and more restrictive. What's coming around is a Vietnam era thing. Basically, in the old days in Vietnam, it was divided up into 4 corps. One, I Corps, 2 Corps, 3 Corps, 4 Corps. In aviation, we knew them as red and blue. Blue was I Corps and 2 Corps, which is northern part of Vietnam, South Vietnam. 3 and 4 were Saigon and around the Hook. We knew anything in blue, we could sink whatever was coming in. In the red, we had to call the Vietnamese Navy, who then would make excuses about having to call the province chief and yada, 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 yada. So we never got to sink anything. So that was kind of the way it played out. Today, you have, as was indicated, the UN sticking their noses in, and now anything that you do is going to be impacted by the bad guys as much as by the good guys.
I'll kind of caveat that. So just so people really understand, rules of engagement is what a military has to go through in order to engage something, to kill it. And it also now includes this targeting stuff, which is like what you have to do in order to send out propaganda or drop flyers somewhere and some other stuff. But predominantly it's what you have to do in order to kill someone, or fire on their vehicle or whatever, destroy something, the cool stuff. So as a soldier or as any kind of military person on the line, you're going to want as simple and concise a rule of engagement as possible. He's a threat, I kill him. I mean, that's what the person on the front wants. As you get progressively higher, though, there's all these additional risks that commanders face. So there's the risk to the soldier. Okay, well, if our rule of engagement is they're waving a red flag and we know the red guys are bad guys, that's really simple for our soldier to understand. But hey, we just found out that in this one village, a red flag means they love us. So we don't want to get our soldiers confused, so we'll remove that whole red flag thing. And it's a risk to soldiers overall, but it prevents us from killing these guys who actually like us. So as you get progressively higher, you'll get more and more decisions made about, well, it's a risk to us, but it's a greater risk of, hey, we're going to piss off other people. And what I think you're constantly seeing throughout more modern wars coming out of World War II into Vietnam, Afghanistan, Iraq, etc., is you have the problem of communication. Commanders feel like they can talk immediately down to the troops, and they can with radios and BFTs and etc. So they feel like they should control what those troops are doing. So then they create more and more restrictive rules of engagement. You can't shoot unless you get authorization from this guy 4 levels above you. And so where that comes into play and where that becomes a problem, and is a great point of conflict for authors, is when that person on the line who's being physically shot at or is seeing people around him being killed, when he has to make a decision that violates those rules. And if you violate the rule of engagement, you're going to jail. If you're lucky. If you're really unlucky, you're getting executed for war crimes. So it creates a great point of conflict for you as a writer, and it's very true to life, because every soldier, I'm sure if you go back to Roman times, the Roman legionnaire who was told, hey, you can't kill these people because they like us even if they're throwing rocks at you. You know, there's been a progression of the soldiers always want to be a little bit more free to defend themselves, or at least kill the people they see as their enemies. And the people up top always want to hold that control back so that they don't have a massacre that makes them look bad, or have some other event like they mentioned the dikes in Vietnam. You blow up the dike, you flood the rice field, all those farmers now can't harvest their crops. So hey, I can get paid toting an AK-47 and shooting at Americans. So there's the secondary and tertiary action events that occur from violating those rules of engagement, and noting those is a good way to add to the conflict.
I'll 1 second for you. Real quick, because I know you dropped BFT. If there's an acronym that like you have no idea about, raise your hand and like I just ask whoever's talking to explain it.
And a lot of the reason that the conflict happens is everything in the military, like what he's passing around, it's black and white. It's either a yes or no. It's a 1 or a 0. But when you get into these situations where you've got bullets zinging over you, your friends are dropping and dying, there are going to be situations that come into shades of gray. And you've got to make a quick decision, and you have to live with that decision, remembering the roles of engagement that you were trained prior to going. So that's where a lot of the conflict can be kind of pushed and pulled out as a situation.
Perfect example of what he said. Who here has heard of al-Sadir? He is a big politician in Iraq now. He led this nice little uprising in Iraq against Americans, where he basically told all of his followers, he's a cleric, told all of his followers, kill the Americans, right? So he had 20,000 people in his part of Baghdad, I believe, who all just swarmed out.
Sadr City.
Sadr City. Swarmed out and just started killing every American they could find. Well, Americans swarmed in to try and put down this uprising. While they were doing that, they knew our rules of engagement. We would not target children. We wouldn't engage kids. So they would get 12-year-old boys, 10-year-old boys, stand them on rooftops and have them with a cell phone calling in, hey, there's Americans moving down this alley, calling in squads to go and prep ambushes for the Americans as they move through these alleyways in the city. Our rule of engagement was you don't kill kids. I mean, we're the Americans, we're the good guys. But what happens when the little bastard is literally calling in gunfire on you? And you had a whole lot of conflict there. And that's a great turning point if you're writing a character. He's the good guy. He's, doing everything he can. But if there's a kid who he can physically see calling in attacks on him, that's a wonderful point of conflict that you can have there for him to go through or her to go through, reevaluating their identity of what's right and wrong.
Let me go back a few years further. How many remember the attack in Beirut in 1983? Obviously not a lot of y'all because you aren't old enough.
I still remember now as well.
Got it.
It's a couple months before I was born.
Sometimes it sucks being the old fart.
I studied it though.
There was a major change in American ROE after Beirut. Up until that point, American servicemen did not have the right to protect themselves. That incident caused a change in ROE that allowed American service people to shoot back if they were in danger.
Let me do a quick, I was about to say, so the Beirut bombing is in 1983, basically the United States intervened in Lebanon to try to serve as a peacekeeper force along with the French. What ended up happening with the Beirut bombing is you literally had the rules of engagement from the commander on the scene was that, and this is before Goldwater-Nichols, which is an act that established combatant commanders, things of that nature. You had the Navy and Marine commander on the scene, the 6th Fleet commander, say, we're not going to have Marines with weapons or with rounds in their weapons, because what we do not want to have is an incident where Marines basically end up becoming combatants between all the factions, because that gets ugly quick. So the local Shia militia decided to have one of their friends get into a 5-ton truck full of explosives. It's actually on the top 20 largest man-made explosives of all time. And turtled himself down there, just going to go deliver his bomb to the Marines. And he literally drove, I think it was about a half-mile straightaway right towards the guards, who could do nothing. Because they were, the one thing about rules of engagement, it will get progressively more restrictive every level you go down. Because their commander on the scene had said, not only can you guys not have ammo on the weapons, but we're going to make sure your ammo is not there at the guard post. You have to have an officer to release it who's about 100 yards behind you. So needless to say, our friends with the truck bomb drove right through the barrier to Marine barracks, and there's, what was it, 283 Marines?
214 dead.
Yeah, 214 dead.
And some of them were local, some of them were Marines.
Yeah.
It was shameful. The bombing of the USS Cole, that's another one where this little boat puttered up alongside, disregarded all hails, hey, go away, puttered right up alongside and blew up. And if they'd had a 50 cal on deck or something, they could have stopped it.
So
Which
they
they do now.
established two different. So the Beirut bombing was what gave, I guess, Army soldiers the right to defend
Yes.
themselves.
Anybody.
Was the Cole the one that
So-
changed that for the Navy?
So the
Yeah.
here's what ended up happening after the Beirut bombing. And that this is just the background of the history. You now have, with most rules of engagement, the very first statement is nothing in these rules of engagement removes your right to self-defense. That is what I like to call, when I was lieutenant, I used to always tell my men, that's the judge by 12 or carried by 6 rule. If you are worried you're about to be carried by 6, by all means take your chances of being carried by 12.
As soon as you are in fear of your life, basically.
Yeah, all bets are off.
You are legally obligated to defend yourself and
Yeah.
your element you're with.
Now, what happened with Cole, when the Navy goes into a port,
They get sworn.
you go into what's called weapons tight.
Yes.
In other words, every weapon on the boat is locked down. Your missiles, your guns, everything else. At that time, we did not have boarding parties or people on deck other than maybe
Guards.
one guy or watch person, male or female, with a shotgun or a pistol. Was the entire security when you were in a port.
And think about that on a 300-foot long
Yeah.
boat.
Now,
ship.
as crazy as that sounds, the reason why you had that was the last thing you want to have happen in a port, especially where tankers or something else go on, is somebody's not paying attention at the weapons rack and you light off, say, a Standard missile or a Tomahawk or something, and inevitably, as these things go, it's not going to just go detonate harmlessly somewhere. It's going to hit that 90,000-ton liquid gas or gas tanker over there. That's basically, now you have a small scale, conventional detonation.
LNG going off is basically a
It's a
liquefied
nuke
natural
without
gas
radiation.
tanker.
Or you
yeah.
hit the Turkish warship
Bad
next
thing.
door.
Yeah.
That's also
Then
happened.
that's an international incident. Or the Iranian ship next door that might be trying to provoke you.
Yeah.
Then you're basically undeclared
Yeah.
state of war. Now, who all here has been to like a Ren Fair, a Renaissance festival and stuff? Good number. So when you go in there, a lot of times they say either no weapons or they say peace bonded weapons.
Yeah.
That's a rule of engagement for the layperson. They wrap your sword so you can't draw it and stab someone. That is directly something taken from medieval times of, hey, we got a bunch of drunk armed soldiers in town. All right, we'll just wire their sword shut so that they can't draw it immediately and just stab someone in the heat of the moment.
Or we know if you did draw it. I mean, you can't sit there later and say, I don't know how
yeah,
that guy
exactly.
has
It's proof of that you violated the terms of engagement.
Yeah, I've always kind of viewed it as a board game. You got this board game called War, 1 to 1,000+ players. When you open that up, there's black and white rules in there that you got to read and go through to know how to play the game. So that's how I've always viewed rules. And it sounds silly sometimes when you think about it. There's an absurdity to the fact that we have rules to war. What can, we're protecting territory, interests, things of that nature. But we have rules that guide us to what we do. And that's the moral and ethical stone that we take as military members. Because like they brought up earlier, the enemy's not bound by rules, or if they are, if they choose not to follow them, we can't go down to that level. Oh, well, they broke the rules, so we can. So there's also a very moral and ethical guideline that goes through these. So as you're writing, with characters, there's always going to be that, well, they did it, why can't we? And then you really have to go back to the moral and ethical foundation of why we have rules of war. And another area that I don't know if it was going to come up, but that I thought was very interesting when I was in Korea is you have rules for taking care of prisoners that you've taken into your custody. So.
Yeah, that's a good one too. There's been multiple incidents throughout history of, you're in a fight, your buddy is killed immediately or taken captive, worse, and then killed, and then you capture the people who did it. Well, what do? Well, you just saw this guy kill your buddy, right? So most people are going to go, well, let's just kill him. But by our current, rules of warfare, you're bound to treat him with dignity and respect.
The 5 S's.
Yeah.
And
go ahead.
no, I was going to say that they have a rule called the 5 S. I mean, for quick shorthand for looking this up, they call it the 5 S's. And I won't get into it because I've spent a long time. I just always remember them as the 5 S's. But U.S. Army has the shorthand for how they teach you to treat prisoners. Now the joking matter is, the 5 S's in those situations should be replaced with the 2 S's and an F. Shoot, shovel, and forget. But I agree with and this will segue into the next part I want to get to. You treat your enemy better than he treats you for a reason. And that's what I was going to say. I was going to panel everybody and say, I'll start with you then. What's a good reason for ROE?
Well, in the Rebellion and Revolution panel we had yesterday, the term ruthlessness versus cruelty came up. You want to be in warfare, you want to be as ruthless as you can in order to achieve your goals. You don't want to be unnecessarily cruel because cruelty will always piss people off. You want to kill only who you need to so that you don't make a whole bunch of angry widows and orphans who are then going to want to kill you. A example of a rather loose rule of engagement that I heard about but never saw was at one point there was a militia in Iraq that wore white sneakers. That was their uniform. That's how they identified themselves, kind of like a gang. The rule of engagement in that area was if you saw someone wearing white sneakers, man, woman, child, whatever, shoot them. Because nobody else could afford to buy these sneakers. So if they were wearing those white sneakers, they were part of a group that wanted to kill and torture you. Don't know if it's true or not, but this is one of the things that you hear about legendary, so. But yes.
Thank you, Cedar.
I think another point too to kind of keep in mind with we have to treat them better than they treat us is the use of propaganda is just huge. So if you got something where somebody shoots a kid, they're going to use that to embolden the people to go to rise and speak out against it, and it's going to embolden the other soldiers. It's a ploy. So it may be a small incident, but it's going to get blown up. It's going to be propagandized, and ultimately that's why we have that. We're going to treat you better than we treat others. And when I was training and learning all this, where it really kind of hit home for me was if you're doing triage, say there was just an attack, and you got your buddy just took one in the thigh, flesh apart, and then the enemy prisoner that you had, maybe you had him out just doing some manual labor, gets shot in the chest. Who do you administer first aid to first? It's a triage situation. Your prisoner is in danger of dying based off of a chest wound. So you would administer aid to him before you do your buddy. So that's when for me, kind of learning the profession of arms, it took me a while to kind of compute those situations.
Cedar, could you unlock that real quick? No, but going on that, I mean, understand, and Cedar's looked up the 5 S's. I'll get to that here in a second. Understand, even if the kid had it coming, and everybody's sitting here looking like, whoa, what do you mean the kid had it coming? Even if the kid is strapped with a suicide vest and he's getting ready to run into your, a playground you're charged to defend. On CNN, and especially on media that's not aligned towards you, the CNN, I mean, really, they are not anti-military as much as people think they are. Notice I did not say that they're not anti-military at times. But on the hostile media, the only thing they're going to show is that kid from the neck up with a nice 5.56 round between his eyes. So understand, they're not going to show the 25 kilograms of plastic explosives that was on this kid.
Going with that, there's a really hilarious Palestinian propaganda
I know what you're talking
video
about. Yeah.
where they're showing all these children that were killed in a bombing of a school by the Israelis, and as they're panning across, some of the kids are looking up and looking around, and parents are coming over. And all these kids were killed, and that kid's getting up and going over to his dad and stuff, and get him back over there.
Can I ask you to clarify just something real quick? I just want to make sure I understood it correctly. So you mentioned that basically American media would cover from the fact that it would show it from the head
No,
up.
I said the enemy media.
Gotcha. Okay.
Yeah, but
that's why I wanted to make sure.
Friendly or enemy,
Yeah.
sometimes the media is hard to tell which side it is. They're always looking for the story, so
Whatever elicits the emotion.
Yeah,
Exactly.
we'll get to information here in a second, but real quick, I just wanted to cover the 5 S's. Search the prisoner, silence the prisoner. So, and that's silence not permanently, that's, gag, whatever else. I mean, some people, silence, I got my K-bar right. No. Segregate the prisoner. So basically you want to divvy them up from, and this is so it's easier to get information from lower enlisted. You want to segregate officers, NCOs, and enlisted. Safeguard the prisoner, because under the rules of law warfare, the minute someone surrenders, you are now responsible for that person, and to include, they have a higher priority for protection, as Dee mentioned, than your own your soldiers. Seriously, I had a JAG explain this once. If the prisoner does not have a gas mask and you get gassed, you have a legal obligation, once they have surrendered to your care, to give them your gas mask. Now, I will merely tell you as Lieutenant Young, I was always to say, gosh darn it, at my court martial, you guys can all say that, yes, Lieutenant Young said that better be the slowest walk across the gravel to that guy, but it's still the rule.
Doesn't look like it would fit.
Yeah. I mean, you just see
and
his
you might
head, it was
laugh, but that's actually
his head, it looked like a watermelon. So, and then speed the EPW to the rear. Those are the 5 S's. Speed the EPW to the rear. For that
enemy
reason.
prisoner of war,
Yeah.
EPW.
For that reason, and that you don't want them to be there when you get slimed by his friends who realize that you've just taken that position.
Two incidents where that came up in World War II and had broader ramifications was one, British did a raid in, I believe, in on the coast of
Norway.
France.
Or are you thinking the other one?
I can't remember the title,
Okay.
but basically they captured 5 German prisoners, right? These are SAS, these were their trained commando guys. They weren't SAS at the time. But they go in, they captured these 5 Germans, they blew up a bunch of crap, they're on their way out, they're bringing the prisoners with them. The prisoners were still bound, but they started screaming for help because they saw the reinforcements coming. At that point, they also started fighting. The British commandos gunned them down because at that point, it was their lives or their prisoners who were no longer, they were in the middle of an escape attempt, and at that point, sometimes that violates their status as a prisoner. They gun these guys down. The Germans get down to the beach and find these 5 guys bound and gunned down. Immediately decided it was a war crime. They posted with Switzerland that the British had murdered these 5 soldiers, and Hitler ordered that any British commando from that point on that they caught was going to be murdered. There was no prisoners from that point on for any British commandos, and that became part of the German rules of engagement. Don't take any of them alive.
Funny, I think that something similar also happened with the bombings of cities, where the British accidentally bombed Berlin, and then Hitler authorized bombing of British cities.
So Rotterdam is actually, so the Luftwaffe wars of engagement, and this is, usually people give you a crazy look when you say this. The Luftwaffe rules of engagement at the start of World War II were they did not bomb civilian targets. So they went to go bomb the city center of Rotterdam, and they had a legitimate military target they were going to bomb. And because both of the crosswinds, because this is World War II, both because of the crosswinds, and I think it was one of the German guys on the ground, basically their equivalent of ALO, messed up, sent the wrong flare pattern. They started bombing early. They basically just right to. I mean, the order is written that they were not to bomb the city center of Rotterdam. Well, of course, they bombed the city center of Rotterdam.
And World War II munitions were not, guided. They were, you just dropped this massive wave of bombs, and hey, we hit in the right county.
Did we hit the factory?
Yeah. Especially the nighttime bombing. But.
Yeah.
Let me go back.
I think too to kind of keep in mind, if you look at the timeline, like, there were treaties after World War I that kind of loosely established rules of war.
And
After World War,
weapons are a good example.
after World War II, the Geneva Conventions were formed,
Yeah.
and that's where the rules of engagement, rules of war, became more rigid, more black and white, and more established and more widespread.
Does anybody want to take a guess at what organization was created out of the Hague Agreement in 1907 and the Geneva Accords? I'm getting a lot of blank stares. The Red Cross. The Red Cross was created out of the Geneva Convention to allow a third party to check on the prisoners of war. That has since been modified to include Red Crescent and a number of the other organizations that exist in the Middle East.
Now, just real quick, because I too see some of the blank stares. You guys know what I mean by when we say the Hague Convention and the Geneva Convention? Okay, just want to make sure. The Hague Convention is pre-World War I, Geneva Convention is post-World War II. So basically the Hague is, let's not do this. The Geneva Convention is, no, really, we meant what we said. Let's not do this.
So I can assume after World War III we'll have the super duper Geneva Convention.
Well, both of them are based around treatment of prisoners.
Yeah.
As far as today, the San Remo Agreement in 2009, which was basically done by us, with the Brits, and I forget who else was in it, basically coalition forces, is the first time where they've actually tried to codify ROE.
And there's a ton of separate treaties, like there's the Ottawa Treaty, which I personally hate, which says no minefields. We're not going to use minefields because they're dangerous to civilians. The non-signatories include us, but we agree to honor it anyway. But then there's the Russians, the Chinese, the Italians, the French, off and on, agree to use it and not use it. So basically everyone else in the world who produces mines and sells weapons don't honor it, but we're good guys and we're going to.
Yeah. And I understand there's ramifications with all the rules of engagement. Just real quick before you move on to the next part. When you decide as a signatory to a treaty or a rule of engagement not to do things, that may mean overnight or as of a certain year, 3/4 of your ammunition inventory had to be replaced. Cluster bombs are a prime example. Because of the Ottawa Agreement, we sharply curtailed our use of cluster bombs. It used to be, especially when they did air or called it an airstrike, they told you, the thing you wanted to ask for was cluster bombs, because that's fun for everybody 100-meter football field.
Do you guys know what cluster bombs are? I see some nodding heads. I'm going to explain.
Yeah.
So a cluster munition is awesome. You fly overhead, you drop one bomb that explodes out, and it drops all these little grenade bombs, these bomblets, and those all detonate, and one bomb wipes out a whole armor formation. It's amazing.
I've done testing on the fuses and some of the electrical systems.
Unfortunately,
how it goes.
10% don't go off. So 10% of, 1,000 bomblets is still 100 bombs, right? That are just lying around, and they'll go off randomly.
About the size of this.
Yeah.
Kid walks along and he sees a little black ball. Oh, awesome! This is great. I'm gonna go play catch, and that's a bad day for
Timmy and
for
Lassie have a bad day, yes.
That got
So,
dark really fast.
So that's why we don't use cluster bombs, even though they're freaking amazing if
Yeah.
you're taking out an armored formation.
Armor formations, troops in the open, enemy air defense systems.
Runways.
Yes, runways.
Yeah.
But because you have so many, and understand, as dark as we are up here, I can understand both sides of this. No one likes the thought that 20 years after this war is over, some kid's going to be out there with his dog, and Fido's going to get them both killed.
Yeah.
Because they talked about painting them bright orange or doing whatever else, but
I've literally seen pictures. Well, I've gone through this file of a house that was built out of landmines.
Yeah.
Russian landmines in Afghanistan. The guy had found them. He'd been oh, these are great, they're the perfect size. And so he built his foundation of his house out of Russian landmines and had no idea that, you know, hey, these are going to blow my
House.
and kids and goats into orbit. He just built it
Just
up.
real quick, you don't smoke in bed, do you? I'm just asking.
Yeah, so there are downsides of using mines and that
Yeah.
sort of thing, but they're also way cheaper way to defend a nation. You can build a landmine for like 10 cents a piece.
Even North Korea can afford
Yeah,
them.
exactly. So they throw them everywhere, and it's a magnificent deterrent from like a suicide vehicle IED.
Yeah.
Someone driving 2 tons of explosives into your camp is pretty impossible if they're going to go across 2 or 3 mines that are just going to light them up.
I don't understand why the Americans aren't shooting at me.
Yeah.
There's that nice tilt rod I just ran.
I'm going to eat popcorn.
But no, I mean, all joking aside, as you're, and this will go to the, I'm getting ready to ask the next question. As you're writing, have some of these things in mind. You know, and especially look at era-dependent rules of engagement, because I assure you, if you're writing historical fiction, especially if you write, like, say, World War II, all these nifty things about rules of engagement, they didn't apply certain places, certain times. I mean, my personal favorites, the Eastern Front, where rules of engagement were, do they have a German accent? Okay, we're going to kill them now.
Yeah.
But he's like 11. Good.
Kill him.
Comrade, he will take less bullets. I mean, read the Eastern Front. I just, you know, guys, I'm joking,
gonna ask
but
if
I'm not joking.
Yeah, you
I
want
was
to
gonna ask if there were any theaters where there weren't any. I guess that was my answer.
You want to talk total savagery? Talk the
Pacific.
Eastern Front, the
And the
Pacific as
Pacific.
well. Taking a Japanese soldier
Yeah.
prisoner was like,
Taking
What?
my money.
yeah, what happened? Was he completely incapacitated?
And oh, go ahead.
Now, go ahead.
So I was going to say, even in case we were completely incapacitated, it was not unknown for a Japanese soldier to wake up, be in APW camp, or be, you know, if you did not have him bound correctly, he would undo his bonds, and he would grab a rock. There's actually one documented case, I think, well, I want to say Saipan, where a Marine got killed by a Japanese soldier that he thought was unconscious. Dude woke up, got out of his bounds, picked up a rock, and he went straight Captain Caveman on the guy.
And a lot of times the retreating Japanese, if their companion, their comrade was too injured
Yeah.
to fight on, they'd give him a grenade, or if he was unconscious, roll him over on a grenade,
Yeah.
or even dead, roll him over on a grenade with the pin drawn. So as soon as
And roll
a
him
U.S.
over.
soldier picked him up, boom. Pretty common.
There were also incidents in South Pacific where the Japanese didn't have enough food. And the order came down from IJN
Imperial Japanese Navy.
to kill the prisoners. And they did.
Yeah.
They cut their heads off.
There were incidents where they would, at the start of the war, they would come on an island. There was a monastery, convent, yeah, where there were nuns that were treating just anyone sick. They had some Japanese injured, they had some Australian injured, they had some just local people who were sick. They bayoneted everyone in the place, Japanese, Australian, whoever, all the patients. They walked the nuns down to the beach and they machine gunned them. And there was one survivor, one little old lady nun took a bullet, 30 caliber bullet, through her hip, shattering her pelvis, fell into the water, was unconscious, got washed out to sea up to another island where some locals found her
some coast
and
walkers
cared
found
for
her.
her for the rest of the war. And they would just do that on every island they came across.
So that leads to the next, oh, I'm sorry.
Well, I hope I asked this correctly, but how do you see the relationship of rules of engagement? Because, I mean, it sounds like every side has rules of engagement. How does that affect their moral high ground on a soldier level and
So,
as a diplomat?
If you are certain, utterly certain you are going to win, your rules of engagement will be kill anyone who resists you, because you don't feel there's going to be a reckoning.
Yeah.
If you are totally certain of your moral rectitude, you will say kill anyone in your way, and that could be religious zealotry, that could be ideological zealotry, that could be just you think you're an awesome, amazing person, and these other people don't deserve to live. You saw it with the Imperial Japanese in World War II. They literally thought everyone was inferior to them.
Yeah.
Well, because like when you talk about like when we're going back to World War II, like the Japanese versus American, I mean, those rules of engagement, even in the psyche of the soldier, as they're going through going, I have these rules that I have to follow.
And
is it more moralized or demoralized?
So a lot of their orders came from much higher. And they actually had different orders, and the Germans too had different orders of how to treat different prisoners. So the Germans, if you were Western European, they treated you pretty darn well, up until near the end when they were really losing. If you were Eastern European, oh God.
Like 50% of Russian prisoners.
Yeah,
or something.
and you had a good chance of, if they didn't kill you out of hand, if you spoke German, hey, congratulations, you just joined the German army.
Yeah.
March next to this guy, and otherwise he's going to shoot you in the back of the head.
Yeah.
The Japanese actually had some orders where they were told to treat American prisoners a little bit better, and not kill them out of hand, because they didn't want to piss off America too much, because they were still hoping for that 1-2 punch. Hey, we're done. We're going to back out. Whereas Australians and the British, they'd already killed so many of their people that they were just like, no, kill them all. We want them to get so sick of the bloodshed they will stop fighting.
And kind of what was mentioned earlier too is, you may take a moral high ground, you may be confused, but what it comes down to is you're going to be held accountable.
Exactly.
You're going to be court-martialed, possibly executed.
By your own side.
If there's not an agreement in place, maybe they hand you over to not necessarily the enemy. I'm thinking status of forces agreement.
Oh yeah, no, the host nation.
That's friendly.
To give you an example,
It's about accountability.
So it's status of forces agreement. It's
Yeah.
so fun. So SOFA is usually the acronym.
yeah. Go look up rape of Nanking. The Japanese against the Chinese population. And that will give you an idea of what their morality was at the time, if you want to use that.
From a sci-fi point of view, you could do some interesting stuff. I've seen some stuff, some really dark stuff in the stories where the bad guy is surrounded by these horrible alien gribblies, or the main character is surrounded by these horrible alien gribblies, and he just starts killing everything that moves, and it turns out later that these were the children of the alien species that had captured them, and they were just trying to communicate and show that this was this is our young, we can coexist, and he murders their children.
Which then will have knock-on effects later on with the. So I'm glad you asked that. That's going to get to my next point. Is with the panel, what do you see as the primary reasons that rules of engagement break down? And you already answered partially with the ideology.
It's the change in the warfare, the milieu of what happens. I'm very big when I joined the military before 9/11. 9/11 happens, and I would not have recognized that military that I had to reestablish in, especially as an NCO that had to lead people. So I think that is definitely one of the considerations that you have to kind of account for and think of in your writing too.
There's always that fog of war. The person at the front never knows what's going on big picture, and the people at the back never don't know what exactly is happening at the front.
That's a great point.
So you'll have rules of engagement coming down from on top that may make absolutely no sense, versus at the front, you think everyone in front of you think, sitting here, everyone I see is the enemy because they're in front of me and I'm armed and they're armed. Whereas, he may not see big picture, these guys over here actually like us and they're armed so that they can fight these guys over here. So
These guys are Romanian late 45, they want out, or late 44, they want out of the war. They don't want to still be sitting here in the World War II. That's sort of like what we're now coming to play on.
yeah.
The place that I see breakdown, and this is going to come from where I was working with Office of Naval Research, is in doing R&D systems for new technologies. The point that was brought up earlier about sonar frequencies, I was in the middle of that friggin' battle in 1988 to 1995, where NRDC, which is supposedly the National Resource Defense Council, was suing the U.S. Navy over use of sonars that were used to detect submarines because they, quote unquote, killed whales.
Coming into lawfare, a lot of these law cases that came up of the government and various nonprofits suing the government not to do stuff for the military were funded by outside nations who didn't want us to do stuff.
Chinese, not that I'm going to say that, Might have been a major funding source for NRDC then and is today.
You just said that.
Huh?
Never mind.
They literally caused the U.S. Navy to put submarines and surface ships and people in danger by the lawsuit. Those people still are in danger today, every day, because of those restrictions.
So we can't use sonar anymore?
Certain
Certain sonars, we are only allowed to use in very specific places in the world.
Unless wartime breaks out.
So there's electronic warfare, which includes sonar and some other stuff, even
Yeah.
though it's not electronic, where everyone's constantly trying to upgrade and use different frequencies, and certain nations identify, wow, they're really good at using these frequencies. Hey, we should ban it. Let's talk to the FCC.
Yeah.
And
So I'll go ahead and we'll toss this out for potpourri for the crowd. Sir?
I was going to ask, like with cyber warfare, like are there really very many conventions for that in place yet, or is it still
that's
so
the
new?
Wild West.
So
That terrifies me. Legitimately terrifies me.
a great book to read is Cyber War Will Not Take Place. And that talks about where cyber warfare is now and some of the problems with it. And I should know who the author is because I reviewed the book for Naval or for Proceedings magazine, but that's the name of it. Cyber War Will Not Take Place. And he goes into just how like it really is the Wild Wild West right now. People have not figured out what is warfare with cyber. So if basically I turn off your electrical grid, is that warfare? Well, you may not think so, but then that little old lady whose respirator just stopped,
Yeah.
she's kind of pissed.
Yeah.
She's really upset.
Or she's dead.
She's dead.
Yeah. So, yeah, one thing with that is until people are directly killed by cyber
Yeah.
warfare, I don't think we're ever going to get a
Yeah.
straight answer.
Because to date, you've never had someone killed by cyber warfare. You've only had people
Directly.
killed by the knock-on effects.
Yeah.
Sir?
How does your insurgent stay under the white hat and not walk over into the
They
dark
don't
side?
care.
Well, no, if you want to stay on the light side, seriously, all you had to do is armbands.
Yeah.
You don't have to
the
go
white
out and buy-
sneakers I mentioned earlier.
Yeah, no, but and
A
if you
uniform.
declare, if you say, as an insurgent organization, like there are several instances of different segments of the French Marquis during World War II, and that's why they wrote the rule the way they did, saying, we got red armbands. We are only conducting operations with red armbands. So if you see someone attacking you and they don't have a red armband, it's not us, and you can do whatever you want to them. The Gestapo is basically like, we're going to hang everybody anyway.
Yeah.
But that was how they got around that. Is they, and how you can still get around that is, if you are an insurgent organization, you say our uniform is basically the checkerboard patch on the right-hand side, and anytime we go to like blow something up or do something else, slap on the checkerboard. You have not complied with the Geneva Convention. You get fair trial, fair treatment as a prisoner. Now you lose all your checkerboards and you can't do operations. Well, then they can shoot you out of hand.
Does this still apply? Well, does this become a problem like in World War II when the commandos would be wearing civilian coats over their standard uniform?
As long as when you kick things off for the hostilities, civilian uniforms have to come off.
Otherwise, you could be hung as
Yeah, and that's so. I don't know if you're a case in point, and this one is kind of famous internationally. HMAS Sydney. Part of the question they had whether or not they were going to shoot the German captain out of hand, and they really nearly did shoot him, is they were convinced that there's no way this light cruiser could get jumped by this armed merchantman without him having had a false flag. And really what happened was the Sydney's captain was complacent. I mean, what they realized is we have 100 different Germans who are all telling the same story, and they were all separated by up to about 50 miles when, scooped up the survivors. They haven't been together since. That's part of that segregate part, so nobody can get their story straight. Clearly, the captain made a mistake, and the Germans got lucky with the first salvo. That's the type of thing where, under the law of land warfare, you have to declare yourself. And if you declare yourself, there's a lot of stuff that immediately you get carte blanche to do a whole bunch of things against other hot combatants. You still don't get to blow up civilians. You still don't get to shoot prisoners. But if you say, we're the Marquis, and hey, this is how we're operating, all facilities and everything else are fair to go.
Let me jump into science fiction here for a second. When you look at rules of engagement and how you write your books, you're going to have multiple sets of rules of engagement. You're going to have your planetary combat.
Yeah.
You're going to have your space combat. You're going to have your civilians. Anybody read John Ringo's Troy Rising or any of those, Citadel? Okay.
giant battle stations of death.
Yeah. Okay, what does he do with anything that is a escape pod?
It's off limits.
It's off the list. Both sides pick up pods.
Yeah, and that's that's a good point. There's a few books I've read, not just his, but where the enemy's like, oh, there's escape pods, target practice, and that kind of thing,
I don't know.
depending on the
Yeah.
society, that's an immediate way, though, for your reader to go, these are the bad guys, found them.
Yeah, yeah.
As a writer, just start at the top, rules of engagement, drill yourself down till you find something that fits in your story.
Yeah.
Because the person that has to make the decision, his story's gonna be a lot different than the person that has to follow the order.
Yep. All right, well, that's it. We're out of time, so thank you, everybody.